They always say family is your foundation. But when the literal foundation of my apartment building cracked open in the middle of the night, I learned the hard way that some families are just fault lines waiting to swallow you whole. I was standing on my parents' porch, holding my terrified 5-year-old daughter's hand after losing our home. I thought we were safe. I thought blood meant something. Instead, my own mother looked at my little girl, a child who had already lost so much in her short life, and told me there was no room for her. They told me I could stay, but she had to go. Why? Because my spoiled brother needed extra rooms for his virtual reality gaming, and they would rather keep his dogs in air conditioning than give my child a place to sleep. If you have ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, you know the exact kind of rage that burned in my chest. I did not scream. I did not beg. I just made a promise to myself that they would pay for breaking her heart. And they did. Started at 2 in the morning. Not with a gentle rumble, but with a violent, roaring jolt that felt like a freight train slamming into the side of our apartment building. I woke up to the sound of my bookshelf tipping over, hardcover books hitting the hardwood floor like gunshots. The walls groaned. The window panes shivered so hard I thought they would explode inward. I did not even think. I just moved. I sprinted across the tiny hallway to my daughter's room. Juniper was sitting straight up in her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her wide eyes reflecting the streetlights outside. She was not screaming, which somehow made it worse. She was just frozen in pure terror. I grabbed her, wrapped my body around hers, and crouched under the heavy oak doorframe of her bedroom while the earth threw a tantrum beneath us. It lasted maybe 40 seconds, but it felt like 40 years. When the shaking finally stopped, the silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of car alarms wailing in the distance and the distinct drip of a busted water pipe somewhere above us. "Daddy," Juniper whispered, her tiny fingers digging into my shoulder. "Is the house broken?" "We are okay, Bug," I lied, stroking her hair. "We are safe." But we were not safe. By sunrise, a city inspector in a yellow hard hat and a clipboard was standing in my living room, pointing a flashlight at a jagged crack running from the ceiling all the way down to the baseboards. He did not look at me with sympathy. He just looked tired. He slapped a bright red sticker on my front door. Unlivable. That was the word he used. Unlivable. We had 1 hour to pack whatever we could carry and get out. I stood on the sidewalk with 2 duffel bags, a cooler full of whatever was left in the fridge, and my 5-year-old daughter holding my hand. I am a social worker. I spend my days finding emergency housing for other people, navigating the labyrinth of state resources, and convincing terrified kids that things will get better. But standing there, staring at the red tag on my door, my mind went entirely blank. The emergency shelters were already overflowing. The cheap hotels were booked solid by hundreds of other displaced families. I had no plan B. So, against every instinct I had developed over 32 years of life, I pulled out my phone and called my mother, Delphine. She answered on the second ring, the background noise of television chatter spilling through the receiver. "Declan? What is going on? We saw the news about the earthquake." "Mom, it is bad," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice for Juniper's sake. "The building is red-tagged. We cannot stay here. Every hotel in the city is full. I know it is a lot to ask, but can we come stay with you and Dad for a few days? Just until I figure out a rental." Her response was immediate. "Oh, honey, of course. Come home. We have plenty of space. Drive safe. Okay?" The relief that washed over me was so intense my knees actually buckled a little. I thanked her profusely, ended the call, and looked down at Juniper. "We are going to Grandma and Grandpa's house," I told her, trying to force a reassuring smile. We loaded up my beat-up sedan and started the 5-hour drive. The highway was a mess of debris and traffic, but inside the car, I tried to make it feel like an adventure. We played I Spy, we listened to her favorite cartoon soundtracks, and we ate stale crackers from the glove box. The whole time, my mind was racing. My relationship with my parents had always been strained. I was the invisible child, the one who just handled things quietly while they poured all their energy, money, and affection into my older brother, Barrett. But in that moment, as the miles rolled by, I let myself believe that a crisis could change things. I let myself believe that they were stepping up to be the grandparents Juniper deserved. I was a fool. If you have ever had to ask for help from people who make you pay for it with your dignity, hit that like button. You are not alone. It was late evening when we finally pulled into their sprawling driveway. The house was massive, a beautiful 2-story colonial situated on 3 acres of prime real estate. The porch light was on, casting a warm, inviting glow over the manicured lawn. For a split second, looking at that house, I felt a strange sense of comfort. I unbuckled Juniper, grabbed our bags, and walked up the front steps. I did not even have to knock. The door swung open, and my mother stood there, a practiced smile on her face. "Declan, you made it," she said, reaching out to hug me. But as she pulled back, her eyes shifted to the space right behind my leg. Her smile froze. The warmth vanished from her face so fast it gave me whiplash. She looked down at Juniper, who was peeking out shyly, clutching her stuffed rabbit. My mother's voice dropped an octave, turning flat and cold. "You brought her." I stared at my mother, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to laugh, shake her head, and welcome her granddaughter inside. But the silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Juniper tightened her grip on my pant leg, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Kids always know. They always feel it when they are not wanted. "Of course I brought her, Mom," I said, my voice steady but tight. "She is my daughter. Our home was just condemned. Where else would she be?" My mother let out a heavy sigh, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater. "Declan, we said you could come. We did not say anything about the child. We just do not have the space right now." I blinked, genuinely struggling to comprehend the words coming out of her mouth. "You do not have the space? Mom, you live in a 5-bedroom house." Before she could answer, heavy footsteps echoed from the hardwood floor in the foyer. My older brother, Barrett, appeared in the doorway. He was wearing silk loungewear, looking like a catalog model for entitled trust fund kids. Flanking him on either side were his 2 massive, purebred Dobermans, wearing custom leather collars. "Hey, Deck," Barrett said, leaning against the doorframe, not even glancing at Juniper. "Rough break with the apartment. But Mom is right. The inn is full." "Full," I repeated, my anger starting to simmer beneath the surface. "Barrett, you are a single guy. How many rooms do you need?" Barrett chuckled, a condescending sound that made my jaw clench. "Well, I have the master suite, obviously. The 2nd bedroom is my home office. The 3rd one is my virtual reality gaming lounge. You cannot expect me to pack up my rigs. They are highly sensitive equipment. And the 4th bedroom," he gestured down to the 2 massive dogs sitting at his feet. "That is the dogs' room. They need their own space. The temperature control in there is set perfectly to 70 degrees so they do not overheat. You know how sensitive their skin gets." I stared at him. Then I stared at my mother. My father, Judson, had drifted into the hallway by now, standing silently behind his wife, looking down at his golf shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. He was an enabler to his core, never once standing up to Delphine's cruelty or Barrett's selfishness. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have a virtual reality room. You have a dedicated, air-conditioned room for 2 dogs. But you do not have space for your 5-year-old granddaughter who just lost her home in a natural disaster. Do not twist it, Declan," my mother snapped, her tone dripping with annoyance. "It is not our fault you decided to play savior and adopt a child you cannot even provide a stable roof for. Barrett needs his space to decompress. He is an entrepreneur. He has a lot of stress, and the dogs are used to a certain routine." "I can sleep on the floor," Juniper whispered, her voice trembling. "I will be super quiet. I promise." Hearing that tiny, terrified voice beg for a spot on a hardwood floor broke something fundamental inside of me. Every ounce of hope I had that this family could be decent shattered into dust. My mother looked down at Juniper, not with pity, but with blatant disgust. "It is not about being quiet," she said coldly. She looked back at me, her eyes hard. We told you to come alone. We would rather keep the dogs comfortable. She belongs in a shelter anyway. The words hung in the crisp evening air. She belongs in a shelter. My daughter, who had spent the first 3 years of her life bouncing between abusive foster homes. My daughter, who still woke up screaming from nightmares about being abandoned. My mother had just looked her in the eye and told her she belonged in a shelter, simply because her existence was an inconvenience to my brother's dogs. A red haze formed at the edges of my vision. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the front door off its hinges. I wanted to grab my brother by his silk shirt and throw him onto the lawn. But I looked down at Juniper. Her eyes were welling with tears, her bottom lip quivering. She was watching me, waiting to see if the world was going to end again today. If I exploded, I would terrify her. I would prove my mother right that we brought chaos. So I swallowed the fire burning in my throat. I stood up straight, looked my mother dead in the eyes, and locked all the emotion away. Noted, I said. Just one word. I did not wait for a response. I scooped Juniper up into my arms, turned my back on the massive house, and walked to my car. I strapped her into her car seat, ignoring the way my hands were shaking. I got into the driver's seat, threw the car in reverse, and backed out of the driveway without a second glance. We drove in silence for 10 miles until I found a cheap roadside motel. The neon sign buzzed, flickering a dull red. I paid $40 in cash to a bored clerk behind bulletproof glass. The room smelled intensely of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. The carpet was stained, and the bedspread looked like it had survived the 70s. I set Juniper down on the lumpy mattress. She did not cry. She just curled into a tight ball, hugging her rabbit, staring blankly at the wall. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her back in slow, soothing circles until her breathing finally leveled out and she fell asleep. The silence of the motel room was heavy. I sat in the dark, staring at the peeling wallpaper, feeling the sting of betrayal settle deep into my bones. Then, the screen of my phone lit up on the nightstand. A text message. I reached over and looked at the screen. It was my mother. "We are sorry things got tense, Declan. You know we love you. Let us know when you drop her off somewhere so we can set up the guest bed for you." I stared at the glowing words in the dark. That text right there was the match that lit the powder keg. I did not reply to the text message. I simply turned the phone face down on the cheap laminate nightstand and leaned my head back against the headboard, listening to the hum of the broken ice machine outside our door. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a relentless projector, playing back every single moment of my life that led up to this grotesque rejection. Being the invisible child in a family is not something that happens overnight. It is a slow, methodical erasure. You learn very early on to make yourself small, to ask for nothing, to accept the scraps left behind by the golden child. Growing up, Barrett was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets forced to orbit his demands. If Barrett wanted a new gaming console, my college fund got raided. If Barrett had a minor cold, the whole house went into lockdown. I remembered being 12 years old, coming home with a straight A report card. I put it on the kitchen counter, hoping for a nod, maybe a good job. My father glanced at it, grunted, and pushed it aside to make room for Barrett's third-place participation trophy from a regional tennis tournament. That very same week, my mother cleared out my bedroom, the one with the window facing the backyard, and moved all my belongings into the cramped, windowless storage room in the basement. Why? Because Barrett needed a dedicated room to display his sports memorabilia. I spent the next 6 years sleeping in a glorified closet, surrounded by boxes of old winter coats, telling myself it was fine. That was the phrase I lived by. It is fine. I do not need much. But I did need something. I needed parents. What I got instead were investors who poured all their emotional capital into a sinking ship. Barrett was a chronic failure disguised as an entrepreneur. He dropped out of 3 different colleges, started 4 different businesses that all mysteriously went bankrupt within a year, and crashed 2 luxury cars. Yet Delphine and Judson bailed him out every single time. They paid his debts, bought him new cars, and praised his creative genius. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through a state university, got my degree in social work, and bought my own modest apartment. I never asked them for a dime. I never asked them for a favor. And because I did not need them, they resented me. Then came Juniper. I met her when she was 3 years old. I was the caseworker assigned to her file. She was a fragile, terrified little ghost of a child who had been severely neglected by a mother struggling with heavy addiction. She did not speak for the first 2 months I worked her case. She just sat in the corner of the foster agency, tracing patterns on the floor with her tiny fingers. The system was failing her, bouncing her from one overcrowded foster home to another. I could not sleep at night thinking about her. So, I did the one thing social workers are warned against doing. I brought my work home. I fostered her, and eventually, I fought tooth and nail to adopt her. When the judge finalized the adoption, it was the proudest day of my life. I called my parents, hoping that just this once, they would share my joy. My mother's response still echoed in my ears. A single man raising a traumatized orphan? Declan, why do you always choose the hardest, most unrewarding path? You are going to ruin your life. They refused to come to the adoption celebration. They refused to acknowledge her birthdays. When I brought her over for Thanksgiving last year, my mother handed Barrett's dogs a plate of prime rib, but gave Juniper a frozen microwave dinner because she probably prefers cheap food anyway. I had swallowed all of it. Every insult, every slight, every cruel comparison. I told myself that as long as I shielded Juniper from the worst of it, we could maintain a polite distance. But tonight, standing on that porch, the polite distance shattered. My mother telling my daughter she belonged in a shelter was the final exhibit in my lifelong museum of pain. The doors were closed. The tour was over. I looked over at Juniper, her small chest rising and falling beneath the thin motel blanket. She deserved a father who fought for her, not a father who silently endured the abuse of the people who hurt her. Just as the first rays of gray dawn started to filter through the cheap curtains, a sharp, sudden knock echoed on the motel room door. I froze. It was 2 a.m. We were in a sketchy part of town. I slowly stood up, grabbing the heavy metal flashlight I always kept in my car emergency kit, and crept toward the door. I peered through the scratched peephole, bracing myself for trouble. But I did not see a stranger. Through the distorted glass of the peephole, I saw a woman pacing frantically on the exterior walkway, a cigarette clutched in her hand. It was my mother's younger sister, Aunt Inez, the ultimate flying monkey. Inez was a bitter, divorced woman who lived for family drama and operated as Delphine's personal attack dog. If my mother needed someone to do her dirty work or spread a rumor, Inez was always on speed dial. I kept the chain lock secured and opened the door just a crack. Inez? How did you find me? What are you doing here? She pushed against the door, her face contorted in exaggerated outrage. Open the door, Declan. Your mother called me weeping hysterically. She checked the location tracking on your family phone plan. Do you have any idea what you have done to her? Keep your voice down, I hissed, glancing back at the bed to make sure Juniper was still asleep. My daughter is resting, and I do not care if my mother is crying. She made her choices. Choices? Inez scoffed, blowing a cloud of smoke into the cold air. She asked you to be reasonable. Barrett is going through a very stressful business transition right now. He needs his sanctuary. And you show up unannounced, demanding they turn their beautiful home into an orphanage for some stray you picked up. The word stray made the grip on my flashlight tighten so hard my knuckles popped. If you ever refer to my daughter as a stray again, I will have you removed from this property by the police, I warned, my voice dead calm. Inez rolled her eyes, unfazed. Oh, stop the tough guy act. You are being completely irrational. Look at where you brought this child. A filthy motel by the highway. What kind of father does that? Honestly, Declan, your mother is worried sick about the girl's safety. She told me to tell you that if you do not bring the child to a proper facility and come home right now, she is going to make a call. My stomach dropped. A call? To who? Inez smiled, a thin, cruel slash across her face. Child Protective Services. You work for them, you know how it goes. An anonymous tip about a single father dragging a vulnerable little girl into a hazardous motel environment after losing his apartment. They will open an investigation. They will pull her out of your custody so fast your head will spin. Is that what you want? To lose her? The threat hit me like a physical blow. They knew exactly where to strike. As a social worker, I knew how flawed the system was. An anonymous tip, especially involving a recently adopted child with a history of trauma, would mandate an immediate investigation. Even if I was cleared, the trauma of having caseworkers interrogate Juniper, the risk of her being temporarily placed in emergency care, it would destroy her. My family was willing to weaponize my own profession against me, willing to rip my daughter away, just to force me into submission. Panic threatened to choke me, but I forced my face to remain a blank mask. I looked Inez up and down, feeling nothing but profound disgust. Tell Delphine, I said slowly, that if she ever dials that number, I will make sure she regrets it for the rest of her miserable life. I slammed the door in her face and threw the deadbolt. I leaned against the cheap wood, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The walls of the motel room suddenly felt like a cage. I had to get Juniper out of here. I had to get us somewhere completely off the radar, somewhere safe. My hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was only one person I trusted, Maeve. She was a senior caseworker at my agency, a fierce, no-nonsense woman who had mentored me through the adoption process. I hit call. She picked up on the first ring, her voice groggy. Declan? It is almost 3 in the morning. Are you okay? I need a favor, Maeve. I breathed, trying to keep my voice from cracking. My building was red-tagged after the quake. I tried to go to my parents' house, but they refused to let Juniper stay. Now my aunt is threatening to call CPS on me with a false report to take custody away. I cannot stay at this motel. I need somewhere safe. There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of rustling sheets. Maeve's voice shifted from sleepy to commanding in a millisecond. Pack your bags. I will text you my address. My guest room is ready. Do not talk to anyone. Do not answer any calls from your family. Just get here. Thank you, I choked out. We protect our own, Declan. Get moving. I hung up the phone and turned to the bed. I gently shook Juniper awake, bundling her in her thick winter coat while she rubbed her sleepy eyes. As I shoved our few belongings back into the duffel bags, my mind was racing with a million different anxieties. I felt hunted. I felt utterly powerless. But as I grabbed my wallet from the nightstand, my thumb brushed against an old, worn insurance card tucked behind my driver's license. The address printed on it caught my eye. It was my parents' address. But it wasn't just their address. I stopped breathing, the panic receding, replaced by a sudden, razor-sharp clarity. As I packed our bags again, I swore this was the last time my daughter would ever be treated like a burden. And then, a memory struck me. A piece of paper from 15 years ago. A legal document signed in black ink by my late grandfather. We arrived at Maeve's house just before dawn. She lived in a quiet, unassuming suburban neighborhood, miles away from the sprawling estates where my parents resided. Maeve opened the door wearing a thick bathrobe, holding a steaming mug of coffee. She took one look at my pale face and Juniper's exhausted expression, and simply stepped aside to usher us in. Guest room is down the hall on the right. Blankets are on the bed. Put her down, then come to the kitchen, she ordered gently. I tucked Juniper into a real bed, making sure her stuffed rabbit was safely tucked under her arm. Within seconds, she was fast asleep, the tension finally leaving her small body. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall. She was safe here. No dogs, no cruel grandmothers, no threats. I walked into the kitchen, where Maeve pushed a mug of black coffee into my hands. I sat at her small dining table and told her everything. I told her about the red-tagged apartment, the refusal at the door, the VR room, the dogs, and Aunt Inez's sickening threat. Maeve listened in stony silence, her jaw tightening with every word. They are trying to leverage your love for that little girl to keep you in line, Maeve said. taking a sip of her coffee. It is classic narcissistic abuse. They want you isolated, scared, and dependent. So what is the plan? Because hiding out here is only a temporary fix. I know, I muttered, staring into the dark liquid in my mug. But I remembered something at the motel. Something I have ignored for over a decade because it felt like a betrayal to bring it up. I set my mug down, pulled my laptop from my bag, and powered it on. I logged into my secure cloud storage, navigating through years of digitized personal files. My grandfather, Judson Sr., was a hard, pragmatic man who had built the family wealth from scratch. He never liked my mother's extravagant spending, and he saw right through Barrett's spoiled facade even when we were kids. He passed away when I was 17. I found the file labeled Estate Documents and opened the scanned PDF. When my grandfather died, he left the main house to my parents, I explained, scrolling through the dense legal jargon. But he added a specific stipulation. He knew my parents favored Barrett. He knew they would likely squander the estate or leave me with nothing. So, he structured the deed as a tenancy in common. Maeve leaned over my shoulder, reading the glowing screen. Wait, does that mean? It means, I said, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face, that I own exactly 1/3 of that massive house, legally on paper. It is not just an inheritance waiting to happen. I am a co-owner right now. For 15 years, I had treated that ownership like a ghost. I never claimed it, never brought it up, never leveraged it. I just wanted to keep the peace. In fact, because my name was on the deed, I had agreed to pay a portion of the property taxes and maintenance. For the last 10 years, I had a standing automatic transfer from my checking account to my parents' joint account. $300 every single month like clockwork. I was paying them to maintain a house they had just kicked my daughter out of. $300 a month, I whispered, the absurdity of it hitting me like a ton of bricks. I have been funding Barrett's air conditioning for his dogs. I immediately opened a new tab, logged into my banking portal, located the recurring transfer, and hit cancel. The confirmation screen popped up. Transfer terminated. Felt like severing an infected limb. Okay, so you own 1/3, Maeve said, pacing the kitchen. That is great leverage. You can demand they buy you out. That will give you enough cash to secure a new house for you and Juniper without worrying about rentals. I do not just want a buyout, I said, the cold fury returning to my voice. I want them to feel exactly what they made my daughter feel. Homeless. I searched my contacts and dialed the number for Thaddeus, an aggressive, no-nonsense real estate and probate lawyer I had crossed paths with during some of my tougher foster care cases. He was expensive, ruthless, and exactly who I needed. It was barely 7 in the morning, but Thaddeus picked up immediately. He was always working. I gave him a rapid-fire rundown of the situation, the deed, and the tenancy in common. I heard the frantic typing of his keyboard over the line as he pulled up the county property records to verify my claim. There was a long silence on the phone. When Thaddeus finally spoke, his voice was laced with dark amusement. Declan, you do not just own 1/3, Thaddeus said smoothly. Because of a specific clause your grandfather included regarding dispute resolution among tenants in common. If one party wants out and the others cannot afford to buy them out at fair market value within 30 days, you have the right to force a partition by sale. You can force the sale of the entire estate. Want to proceed? I sat frozen at Maeve's kitchen table. The phone pressed hard against my ear. Force a partition by sale. I could legally force them to sell the house. The grand colonial estate, the manicured lawns, the VR gaming lounge, the climate-controlled dog rooms, all of it put on the auction block because I demanded it. Are you sure, Thaddeus? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They have lived there for 20 years. They consider it their kingdom. The law does not care about kingdoms, Declan, Thaddeus replied, his tone crisp and clinical. The law cares about the deed. You are a 1/3 owner. If you petition for a partition sale, the court will mandate an appraisal, list the property, and divide the proceeds according to the ownership stakes. It is a nuclear option, yes, but it is perfectly legal, and given the wording of your grandfather's trust, highly enforceable. So, I will ask you again. Do you want to proceed? I looked down the hallway toward the guest room where Juniper was sleeping. I thought about the terrified look in her eyes when my mother called her a stray. Thought about the $40 motel room smelling of bleach and despair. I thought about Aunt Inez threatening to call state authorities to rip my child from my arms. Proceed, I said, my voice as hard as stone. Draft the papers. I want them served as fast as legally possible. Excellent, Thaddeus said. Come by my office at noon to sign the petition. I will have a courier deliver the certified notice to their doorstep by tomorrow afternoon. Prepare yourself, Declan. Once I file this, there is no putting the genie back in the bottle. I am counting on it, I replied and hung up. The next 36 hours felt like moving underwater. I went to Thaddeus's sleek downtown office, sitting across his massive glass desk. He slid a thick stack of legal documents toward me. I read every line, ensuring there were no loopholes. I signed my name in thick blue ink, officially launching the missile that would obliterate my family's comfortable, entitled existence. Thaddeus handled the logistics. He sent the formal demand letter via certified mail, return receipt requested, demanding a buyout of my 1/3 share at current market value, which was astronomical, within 30 days, or the partition sale would be initiated through the courts. I spent the next day at Maeve's house, playing board games with Juniper, baking cookies, doing everything I could to create a bubble of normalcy for her. She was resilient, laughing as she got flour all over her nose, but I could tell she was still nervous, always keeping me within her line of sight. I kept my phone on the kitchen counter, waiting. I knew the exact moment the mail carrier usually arrived at my parents' estate. 2 in the afternoon. At exactly 2:15, my phone screen lit up. Caller ID Barrett. I let it ring 3 times. Then, I picked it up and pressed it to my ear, not saying a word. Are you out of your mind? Barrett's voice exploded through the speaker. So loud I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. He was not just angry, he was unhinged. I could hear the distinct sound of paper rustling violently in the background. What is this garbage, Declan? You are suing us? You are trying to sell our house. It is not a lawsuit, Barrett, I said calmly, leaning against Maeve's kitchen counter. It is a formal petition for partition. And it is not your house. It is our house. I own 1/3 of it. I have decided to liquidate my assets. You arrogant piece of trash, he screamed, his voice cracking. You cannot do this. This is my headquarters. I run my businesses out of this house. Mom is having a panic attack on the living room floor right now because of you. Tell Mom to take deep breaths, I replied, my tone entirely devoid of sympathy. And you do not run businesses, Barrett. You run hobbies funded by our parents. There is a difference. You are doing this because of that little brat, aren't you? Barrett snarled, his words dripping with venom. Because Mom told the truth about that street rat you adopted? You are going to make your own family homeless over a kid who isn't even your real blood. The insult barely registered. I was too wrapped in the armor of what I was about to do. I am doing this because I need the capital. Barrett? I said, perfectly echoing the cold, transactional tone my mother had used on me 2 nights prior. You see, I need to buy a new house for my daughter, and since I own 1/3 of that estate, I figured it was time to cash out. You guys have 30 days to buy me out. If you cannot afford it, the court sells the house to the highest bidder. We do not have that kind of liquid cash lying around, and you know it. Barrett roared. Where are we supposed to go, Declan? What am I supposed to do with the dogs? I paused, letting the silence stretch out over the line. I wanted him to hang on the edge. I wanted him to hear the smile in my voice when I finally delivered the kill shot. I do not know, Barrett, I whispered into the receiver. I guess you will have to figure it out, because from where I am sitting, there is just no space for you anymore. But hey, look on the bright side. I hear the local shelter has plenty of room. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. They thought they held all the cards. They thought they could bully, threaten, and discard me whenever it suited them, entirely ignorant of the leverage I held in my back pocket. But they had no idea what was actually buried in their own financial closet. If you are enjoying this payback, subscribe now because the Real bomb is about to drop. My phone immediately started buzzing again. This time it was my mother, then my father, then Aunt Inez. I blocked them all, one by one, watching their frantic attempts to reach me bounce off the digital wall I had erected. I felt a twisted sense of peace settling over me. The war had officially started. But what I did not know, as I stood in Maeve's kitchen feeling like a victorious general, was that my family was not just entitled and cruel. They were desperate, and desperate people make catastrophic mistakes. The legal battle I just initiated was about to uncover a secret so massive, so incredibly illegal, that it would change my life forever. The morning after I dropped the legal hammer on my family, I woke up to a digital war zone. I had blocked my parents, my brother, and my aunt, but I had underestimated the sheer scale of the smear campaign my mother was capable of orchestrating. It started when I opened my laptop in Maeve's kitchen while brewing a pot of coffee. I logged into my social media accounts just to check on some local neighborhood updates regarding the earthquake damage, and there it was, plastered right at the top of my feed. My mother, Delphine, had written a massive, emotionally manipulative essay on Facebook. It was a masterpiece of victimhood. She did not mention the earthquake. She did not mention her refusal to let my 5-year-old daughter stay. She certainly did not mention Barrett's climate-controlled dog rooms. Instead, she spun a tragic tale about an ungrateful, money-hungry son who was using a legal loophole to forcefully evict his loving, elderly parents from their forever home. She wrote about how they had sacrificed everything for me, how they had always supported my career in social work, and how my sudden, malicious lawsuit was breaking her fragile heart. She even attached a photo of herself and my father sitting on their front porch, looking solemn and tired. The comments were a bloodbath. Dozens of extended family members, family friends, and people I had not spoken to since high school were piling on. Aunt Inez was the ringleader, replying to every comment with dramatic exaggerations about how I had abandoned the family and dragged a traumatized child into a dangerous situation just to spite them. People were calling me a parasite, a disgrace, a monster who belonged in jail. They were praying for my mother's strength. They were praising Barrett for stepping up to take care of his parents in their time of need. I sat there staring at the screen as the coffee in my mug went ice cold. Logically, I knew this was their playbook. I knew they would twist the narrative to make themselves the martyrs. But seeing it in black and white, seeing people who had known me my entire life blindly attack me without even asking for my side of the story, it still felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. I wanted to type out a furious response. I wanted to expose everything. I even drafted a comment detailing exactly what they had said about Juniper belonging in a shelter. But I stopped myself. Engaging with them online was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to look unstable. They wanted a public screaming match so they could point their fingers and say, "Look how crazy he is." I closed the laptop. Let them have their online sympathy. I was going to take their actual house. But Barrett was not just relying on public sympathy. He was actively trying to sabotage me financially. Around noon, I received an automated fraud alert on my phone from the bank that held the Joint Emergency Family Savings account. It was an old account my grandfather had set up decades ago, intended for catastrophic family emergencies requiring dual authorization for massive withdrawals. I had not touched it in 15 years, completely forgetting my name was still listed as a primary account holder alongside my parents. The alert showed a pending transfer of $45,000. The entire balance of the account. It was being routed to an offshore business account registered to one of Barrett's failed tech startups. He was trying to drain the emergency funds before the legal proceedings locked everything down. He was trying to take the money and run, leaving my parents with nothing and ensuring I could not claim a dime of it during the asset division. My blood ran cold. I immediately called the bank's fraud department, verified my identity, and flagged the transaction as unauthorized. The representative informed me that because it was a joint account, any party could initiate a transfer, but due to the size, they could freeze it pending an investigation. I told them to freeze the account entirely. Nobody was getting that money. Not me and definitely not Barrett. I called Thaddeus Wright after hanging up with the bank to inform him of Barrett's attempted theft. I expected him to be annoyed, or maybe to tell me to just handle it through the bank. Instead, when Thaddeus answered the phone, his voice was tight, missing its usual arrogant drawl. He sounded genuinely tense. "Declan, do not worry about the Facebook posts, and honestly, do not even worry about that emergency fund right now. The frozen account is the least of our problems," Thaddeus said, his words coming out in a rapid, clipped pace. "Or rather, it is the least of their problems. I just got off the phone with the county clerk's office and pulled the full financial history on the estate." "Okay," I said slowly, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "What did you find?" "You need to come to my office right now, Declan. Do not drive distracted. Just get here as fast as you can. I have something sitting on my desk that is going to blow this entire situation wide open." The drive to Thaddeus's office felt like moving through thick mud. My mind was racing through every possible worst-case scenario. Had my grandfather secretly changed the will? Had my parents found a loophole to kick me off the deed? By the time I walked through the glass doors of his downtown law firm, my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Thaddeus did not even offer me a seat when I walked into his office. He was standing by the window holding a thick manila folder. The city skyline loomed behind him, gray and unforgiving. He turned around, his expression completely unreadable, and dropped the folder onto the center of his mahogany desk. "Open it," he commanded quietly. I stepped forward and flipped the cover open. Inside was a stack of legal documents, printed on heavy stock paper, bearing the official seal of a major national bank. I scanned the first page, my eyes darting over the dense paragraphs of financial terminology. It was a mortgage agreement. "I do not understand," I said, looking up at him. "My grandfather paid cash for that house in the 70s. There is no mortgage. They own it free and clear." "They did own it free and clear," Thaddeus corrected, tapping his index finger on the document. "Until 5 years ago. Look at the loan amount." I looked back down, tracing my finger along the highlighted line. My breath hitched in my throat. The principal loan amount was $450,000. $450,000? I choked out. What on earth did they need $500,000 for? The house was already paid off. According to the public business filings I pulled an hour ago, 5 years ago is exactly when your brother Barrett launched that luxury virtual reality company that spectacularly crashed and burned, Thaddeus explained, his voice cold and analytical. Banks do not just hand out $500,000 to a guy with a string of failed businesses. He needed collateral. So, your parents leveraged the only real asset they had. They took out a massive mortgage on the estate to fund his little entrepreneur fantasy. I stared at the paper, the reality of their sheer stupidity washing over me. They had mortgaged their forever home, the home they just kicked my daughter out of to fund Barrett's delusions. But something did not add up. "Thaddeus, wait," I said, shaking my head. "The house is a tenancy in common. My name is on the deed. They could not legally leverage the property without the consent and signature of every single owner. I never signed off on a mortgage. I never even knew about this." Thaddeus did not say a word. He just reached over, flipped to the very last page of the document, and pointed to the signature lines at the bottom. There were 3 lines. The first bore my father's messy scrawl. The second bore my mother's elegant, looping cursive. And on the third line, sitting bold and black against the white paper, was my name, Declan, signed in a handwriting that looked incredibly similar to mine, but was just a fraction too stiff, a little too practiced. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. The edges of my vision blurred. I reached out and touched the ink, half expecting it to burn me. "That is not my signature," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I have never seen this document in my life." "I know it is not yours," Thaddeus said gently, "because I also pulled the notary records. The notary public who stamped this document had their license permanently revoked 3 years ago for facilitating fraudulent real estate transactions. Your family did not just leverage the house, Declan. They committed major bank fraud. They forged your signature on a federal loan document to get their hands on $450,000. I sank into the heavy leather chair across from his desk, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. It was one thing to be the least favorite child. It was one thing to be ignored, emotionally neglected, and tossed aside when I was no longer convenient. But this was a calculated, criminal betrayal. They had used my name, my identity, and my legal standing to secure a loan that could have ruined my financial future forever if they defaulted. They had sat around a table, practiced my signature, and signed my life away without a second thought. All for Barrett. Always for Barrett. They didn't just reject my daughter, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt cold. They committed a felony in my name. Exactly, Thaddeus said, leaning over the desk, his eyes practically gleaming with legal bloodlust. Which means the petition for partition is no longer just a family real estate dispute. It is a crime scene. I have already contacted a forensic handwriting expert to expedite an analysis. I am also preparing to notify the lending bank of the fraud. Once the bank realizes their $500,000 collateral is built on a forged document, they are going to call the loan in immediately. The entire amount due in full. Your family is going to have to sell that house just to avoid going to federal prison. I looked at the forged signature one last time. The gloves were not just off anymore. They were burned to ashes. The emergency injunction hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I walked into the county courthouse wearing my best charcoal suit, feeling like a completely different man than the one who had stood terrified on a motel room floor just a week ago. Maeve had stayed behind at her house with Juniper, shielding her from the ugliness of what was about to happen. This battlefield was mine alone. When I entered the double oak doors of the courtroom, my family was already seated at the respondents' table. They looked like they had stepped out of a tragic family drama movie. My mother was wearing a conservative, pale gray dress, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. My father looked hunched and frail in a suit that suddenly seemed too big for him. Barrett was sitting between them, glaring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He was dressed in a sharp navy blazer, trying to project the image of a successful businessman being victimized by a jealous sibling. I took my seat next to Thaddeus at the petitioner's table. I did not look at them. I did not offer a polite nod. They were strangers to me now. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Honorable Davies, entered the room and called the session to order. She had a reputation for being entirely devoid of patience for family drama, which was exactly what I was counting on. Their lawyer, a slick, overworked public defender type they had clearly hired in a panic, stood up first. He launched into a passionate, entirely fabricated speech about how I was an estranged son trying to exploit a tragic natural disaster to steal my elderly parents' retirement home. He painted me as a greedy opportunist, demanding the court dismiss my petition request to save this loving family from homelessness. Judge Davies listened with a blank expression, then turned to Thaddeus. "Counselor, your response? Forcing a petition sale on an elderly couple's primary residence is a drastic measure. Why shouldn't I dismiss this and order mediation?" Thaddeus stood up slowly, adjusting his glasses. He did not raise his voice. He did not sound angry. He sounded like a surgeon preparing to make a fatal incision. "Your Honor, we are not here simply to divide a property," Thaddeus began, picking up a thick binder from our table. "We are here to untangle a massive, coordinated financial fraud perpetrated against my client by the respondents." A collective gasp echoed from my family's table. My mother dropped her tissue. Barrett bolted upright in his chair. "Objection," their lawyer sputtered, looking completely blindsided. "There is no basis for such an accusation." "I have the basis right here in my hands, Your Honor," Thaddeus said, ignoring the opposing counsel and walking the binder up to the judge's bench. Exhibit A is a mortgage agreement executed 5 years ago for the amount of $450,000, secured against the property in question. Exhibit B is a sworn affidavit from a board-certified forensic document examiner. The examiner conclusively proves that my client's signature on this federal loan document was forged. Furthermore, the notary who stamped this document lost their license for fraud 3 years ago. The respondents illegally leveraged my client's ownership stake to secure a loan for a failed business venture. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above us. Judge Davies opened the binder, her eyes scanning the forensic report. Her expression went from bored annoyance to absolute, terrifying fury. She slowly lowered the binder and locked her eyes on my family. I turned my head to look at them. It was a picture I will carry with me for the rest of my life. My father was clutching his chest, his face the color of old parchment. My mother's mouth was hanging open, her carefully constructed victim persona shattering into a million pieces. She looked at Thaddeus, then at me, her eyes wide with sheer panic. But Barrett was the best part. His arrogant smirk had vanished completely. His face was stark white, and his hands were trembling so violently he had to grip the edge of the wooden table just to stay upright. He knew it was over. The fake entrepreneur, the golden child, was exposed in open court as a common criminal. "Mr. Thaddeus," Judge Davies said, her voice dripping with ice, "has the lending institution been made aware of this fraudulent document?" "Yes, Your Honor," Thaddeus replied smoothly. "We notified their fraud department yesterday. They are currently expediting a recall of the loan in full." The judge slammed her gavel down so hard it echoed like a gunshot. "This court grants the petition for partition by sale immediately. A court-appointed receiver will take control of the property by the end of the week. Respondents, you are ordered to vacate the premises within 14 days. Furthermore, I am forwarding this forensic report to the district attorney's office for criminal review regarding the forgery." Barrett snapped. He leaped out of his chair, knocking it backward onto the floor, and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You ruined us. You did this because you are jealous. You are a pathetic, jealous loser." Two court bailiffs immediately stepped forward, placing their hands on their duty belts, and forcefully shoved Barrett back into his seat. He looked at me with pure venom. But as I sat there, watching my toxic family completely self-destruct, for the first time in my entire life, I did not feel small. I did not feel invisible. I felt like a giant. Thank you so much for sticking with the story this far. If you are loving this legal smackdown as much as I did, drop a W in the comments below. W is for win, and I will be hearting and replying to every single comment that has it. Now let's finish this. The 14-day eviction period was a masterclass in watching karma collect its debts. I did not have to lift a finger. The court-appointed receiver handled everything with ruthless efficiency. The massive colonial estate, the house where I had spent my childhood sleeping in a windowless storage room, was suddenly slapped with a giant for sale sign on the manicured front lawn. My parents and Barrett had nowhere to hide. Because the bank had officially called in the massive fraudulent loan, their credit was instantly destroyed. They could not qualify for a new mortgage. They could barely even qualify for an apartment lease. The desperate phone calls started on day 3. I had unblocked my mother's number strictly on Thaddeus's advice, just in case they admitted to the forgery on a recorded voicemail, which would further protect my assets. Every evening, my phone would fill up with hysterical voicemails. "Declan, please, you have to stop this." My mother sobbed in one message, all her previous arrogance completely vaporized. "The court officers are here taking photos of the inside of the house. Barrett is having a nervous breakdown. We cannot find a place to rent that will take all of us. You have made your point, sweetheart. Please call the lawyers off. We are a family. We can fix this." Family. The word sounded like a joke coming from her mouth. I saved the voicemail, forwarded it to Thaddeus, and went back to cooking dinner for Juniper. On day 8, the reality of their situation finally hit Barrett. He could not find a luxury rental that would accept his massive, pampered Dobermans without a pristine credit check and a massive security deposit, neither of which he had. I found out through the neighborhood grapevine that he had to surrender his precious dogs to a local rescue shelter. The sheer, delicious irony of it almost made me laugh out loud. My mother had looked at my traumatized daughter and said she belonged in a shelter, choosing those dogs over her own flesh and blood. And in the end, it was the dogs who ended up in the cages, while my daughter was safe and warm in my arms. By day 14, the house was entirely vacant. My parents and Barrett had been forced to move into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of town. There was no virtual reality gaming lounge. There was no climate control for pets. There was barely enough room for the three of them to exist without breathing down each other's necks. Aunt Inez, who had been so loud and aggressive on Facebook, suddenly went completely silent. In fact, the entire extended family abandoned them once the news of the forgery and the impending criminal investigation leaked out. Nobody wants to associate with toxic people once the money dries up. I drove past the empty estate one last time before the new buyers took possession. I parked across the street and just stared at the grand facade. I thought about the little boy who used to hide in the basement, trying to be invisible so he would not get yelled at. I thought about the young man who worked 2 jobs just to afford textbooks, while his brother crashed sports cars. I thought about the father who was told his daughter was trash. I rolled down the window and took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. I did not feel sad. I did not feel guilty. I just felt clean. Like a massive, infected wound had finally been sterilized and closed up. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the ghosts of my past sitting in an empty house that no longer belonged to any of us. The real estate market in their area was red hot, and the estate sold in less than 30 days to a wealthy developer who planned to gut the inside and modernize it. The final closing price was staggering, $850,000. But the distribution of those funds was where the real justice happened. When a property is sold under a partition action, the court divides the proceeds based on ownership stakes, but it also settles any liens or debts attached to those specific stakes. Because Thaddeus had proven through forensic evidence that I was completely innocent of the mortgage fraud, the bank could not touch my 1/3 share of the equity. My parents and Barrett owned 2/3 of the house. Their share of the sale came out to roughly $566,000. However, the bank demanded immediate repayment of the $450,000 loan, plus 5 years of compounded interest, late fees, and massive legal penalties for the fraud. By the time the bank's lawyers were done stripping their share to the bone, my parents and brother walked away from an $850,000 estate with a check for exactly $0. The bank took every single penny they had. They were completely wiped out. Meanwhile, my 1/3 share was protected by the court. After paying Thaddeus his well-deserved legal fees and settling the standard closing costs, a wire transfer hit my bank account on a random Tuesday morning. I opened my banking app while sitting at my desk at the social services agency. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with hot tears. $210,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was not lottery money, but it was freedom money. It was the kind of money that fundamentally alters the trajectory of a person's life. I did not go out and buy a sports car. I did not buy designer clothes or expensive watches. The very next day, I contacted the mortgage lender for the modest, 3-bedroom house I had recently managed to put a down payment on before the earthquake displaced us. I requested a final payoff quote. I took that massive chunk of justice money and I paid off my entire 30-year mortgage in one single glorious transaction. At 32 years old, I owned my home free and clear. No banks, no landlords, no monthly payments hanging over my head. I had a permanent, untouchable sanctuary for me and my daughter. That weekend, Maeve came over to help us unpack the last of our boxes into the new house. I had given Juniper the biggest bedroom in the house, the one with the large bay window that let in the morning sun. She was running around the room, giggling, sticking glow in the dark stars on the ceiling with Maeve's help. I stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her. She looked so light. The heavy, anxious shadow that used to follow her everywhere was completely gone. She had a room. She had a home. She had a father who had burned down an empire just to keep her safe. "You did good, Declan," Maeve said softly, walking over and standing next to me. "You broke the cycle. That is the hardest thing a person can do." "I did not just break it," I said, watching Juniper arrange her stuffed animals on her new, massive bed. "I buried it. And I bought this house with the dirt." The ironic beauty of it all was not lost on me. The wealth my parents had hoarded, the privilege they had used to beat me down and elevate Barrett, had ultimately become the exact instrument of their destruction and my salvation. They had tried to push me out into the cold, and in doing so, they had handed me the keys to a castle of my own making. It has been a year since the court finalized the sale. I am sitting on the back porch of my fully paid-off house, watching juniper chase fireflies in our fenced-in backyard. The structural damage from the earthquake feels like a lifetime ago. The emotional damage from my family feels even further away. I heard through the grapevine that the criminal investigation into the forgery completely fractured whatever was left of my family. To save himself from federal prison, Barrett threw my parents under the bus, claiming my father was the one who actually forged the signature and that he was just a clueless beneficiary. My parents countered by blaming Barrett. They turned on each other like starving wolves fighting over a scrap of meat. In the end, they managed to avoid jail time through a plea deal that involved massive fines and probation, but the stress broke them. My parents are still trapped in that tiny rental apartment, living entirely off Social Security. Barrett is working as a shift manager at a big box hardware store, taking the bus to work because his cars were repossessed. They do not speak to each other anymore. The golden child and his enablers, completely alienated, stewing in their own toxic misery. Occasionally, Aunt Inez will try to send me an email from a new address, telling me that life is short, that family is everything, and that I should reach out and forgive them before it is too late. I do not read them. I just send them straight to the trash folder. I have learned that blood does not make a family. Blood just makes you related. Family is about who stands by you when the ground literally shakes beneath your feet. Family is Maeve, who opened her door at 3 in the morning without asking questions. Family is Juniper, who looks at me like I am the only superhero she will ever need. Family is respect, protection, and unconditional love. Everything my parents failed to give me, I am giving to my daughter. But putting my own parents on the street is a heavy thing to carry, even when they deserve it. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and Juniper is asleep, I look at the legal documents locked in my safe and I wonder if I crossed a line. I wonder if stepping into the role of the executioner makes me just as ruthless as they were. I did not just protect myself. I actively destroyed them. I took the one thing they valued more than anything else, their status, their home, their wealth, and I burned it to the ground. Some people who know the full story still message me, saying I was too harsh on my own flesh and blood. They tell me that I proved my point, and that I shouldn't have left my aging parents to rot in a cheap rental apartment while I live mortgage-free. They say I should have shown them the grace they refused to show my daughter. So, I have to ask you, the people who have listened to this entire chaotic, painful journey, was I too ruthless? Did I take the revenge too far by taking their home and exposing their crimes? Or did they get exactly what they asked for when they looked at an innocent child and told her she belonged in a shelter? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read everything and I really want to know if you think justice was served, or if I became the villain of my own story. If you want more stories about toxic families getting their karma, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.